welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at something pretty significant that's caused quite a stir.
Definitely. The election of Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost as Pope Leo IV, the first American pope.
Exactly. And the reaction, especially in the U.S., was immediate. Very enthusiastic, right?
Right.
We saw former President Trump posting on Truth Social about it being a great honor for our country.
Yeah, quite the moment. And for this deep dive, we've got some specific sources lined up. We're looking at commentary from Advent Messenger, a key passage from Revelation 13, and bits from The Great Controversy.
Right. So the idea isn't just to say, hey, first American Pope, but to really unpack what this might mean, especially through the lens of these particular sources. Potential shifts in Vatican-U.S. relations, and let's say, a specific interpretation of its bigger meaning.
We know you, our listener, want to grasp these big events quickly but thoroughly. So we'll pull out the core arguments from these materials, explore why they're presented this way.
Okay, let's get into it. This initial reaction in the States, it seems overwhelmingly positive.
That's what Advent Messenger points out. It highlights this widespread enthusiasm, noting it goes beyond just Catholics, non-Catholics too.
A sort of national pride thing.
Seems like it. A sense of, an American reaching such a global position, maybe tied to the U.S.'s own standing in the world.
And Trump's message, the source mentions it specifically. Congratulations, it is such an honor. What excitement and what a great honor for our country. I look forward to meeting Pope Leo IV. It really captures that feeling.
It does, but then Advent Messenger puts a specific spin on it. They talk about a potential strategic shift by the Vatican.
Strategic shift. What's the thinking there, according to them?
Well, the argument presented is that choosing an American wasn't random. It's framed as a calculated decision.
Calculated how?
To align more closely with the United States, recognizing its global cloud economy, military diplomacy. The idea being this alignment could give the church more leverage on the world stage, maybe influencing policy.
Interesting. That idea of aligning for leverage. It definitely raises questions about religion and politics mixing. But Advent Messenger doesn't stop there, does it? They bring in a totally different reaction.
Right. They highlight what they call the sadness felt by historic Protestantism.
Historic Protestantism. Why sadness?
Well, it goes back to long-held Protestant views, historically speaking, a deep concern about concentrating religious and political power in one place, specifically the papacy. The Reformation itself was partly about that, right?
Yeah, pushing for religious liberty, separation of church and state. So from that perspective, a U.S. president being so enthusiastic, or an American becoming pope, that's seen differently.
Exactly. Advent Messenger suggests it's seen as a drift away from those American roots. They mention that the reformers viewed the papacy itself as potentially spiritually dangerous.
So a U.S. leader embracing the pope like that, or an American taking the office, is seen by some in that tradition as problematic. Like it blurs those lines between church and state.
Yeah, that's the perspective presented, yes. A troubling sign, potentially compromising those foundational principles.
Okay, now let's bring in the Bible. Advent Messenger connects this directly to prophecy, specifically Revelation 13. How do they make that link?
The interpretation offered is that Revelation 13 actually foretells this kind of close relationship or even a unification between the papacy and the United States.
How so? What's in Revelation 13?
It talks about two symbolic beasts. The first one comes from the sea, often interpreted in this view as a major religious political power, like the papacy, which had influenced, declined, and then revived.
Okay, and the second beast?
Comes from the earth. Looks like a lamb, peaceful maybe, but speaks like a dragon-wielding power. This is often interpreted as the United States.
Lamb-like horns, dragon's voice, representing the U.S. And Advent Messenger points to a specific verse.
Yes, verse 12. Revelation 13.1, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
Right, so the interpretation is the U.S., the second beast.
Exercises the power, the authority of the first beast, the papacy, and leads the world to honor it, essentially. The healed wound, referring to the papacy regaining influence.
So an American pope, in this reading, is a major step towards the U.S. using its power for the papacy, amplifying its reach.
That's the argument put forward, that an American pope would naturally boost the Vatican's message, especially in English-speaking countries and within the U.S. itself.
And this brings back that earlier concern.
Exactly. Advent Messenger frames it starkly. A nation founded against perceived religious tyranny is now, in their view, celebrating a system seen as opposed to gospel truth. They use strong language, trading truth for tradition, freedom for tyranny, becoming drunk on Babylon's deception.
Very strong language indeed.
Yeah?
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the Great Controversy. This source talks about a final warning. How does that connect to all this?
The Great Controversy lays out a specific prophetic timeline, you could say. It sees biblical prophecies, especially in Revelation, pointing towards a final, urgent message to the world before major end-time events.
A final warning, tied to angels' messages in Revelation.
Specifically Revelation 14 and another angel in Revelation 18 who announces the fall of Babylon.
Okay, Babylon. In this context, what does that symbolize? It's not the ancient city, right?
No, not literally. In the interpretation presented in the Great Controversy, Babylon represents fallen or corrupt religious systems that have moved away from what the text considers pure biblical teachings.
So the warning is about these systems.
Yes, and the call in Revelation 18, "Come out of her, my people," is seen as God urging believers to separate from these corrupting influences before judgment falls. This message, combined with others, forms that final warning.
Got it. And what's the absolute core issue in this final warning? Especially thinking about the Vatican-US alignment we discussed.
The central issue, according to this framework, really boils down to worship, specifically Sabbath observance versus what's called the mark of the beast.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Sabbath observance.
The Great Controversy predicts a future time when world powers, under the influence of this symbolic Babylon, will try to enforce the observance of a different day of worship, what the text identifies as a false Sabbath Sunday.
Enforce it. And what happens if people refuse?
The text is pretty clear on that. It predicts civil penalties first, and then ultimately a decree that those who refuse are deserving of death.
Wow, that's contrasted
with the biblical command to keep the Creator's Sabbath, the seventh day Saturday. So the interpretation is choosing to obey a human decree about worship, specifically Sunday, over God's command about the Sabbath that is receiving the mark of the beast.
And this isn't accidental, the text stresses.
No, it emphasizes this is a conscious choice made when the issues are clear, when people understand what's at stake.
So the Sabbath becomes the big dividing line, the great test of loyalty, as the book puts it.
Precisely. Observing the enforced Sunday becomes a sign of allegiance to earthly powers opposing God, while keeping the true Sabbath shows loyalty to God. One gets the mark of the beast, the other the seal of God.
And this future time also involves, according to the Great Controversy, an unmasking of papal power and church and state working together.
Yes. The text predicts a future proclamation exposing the sins of Babylon, the dangers of forcing religious observance through civil law. It talks about revealing the stealthy but rapid progress of the papal power.
Stealthy but rapid.
And it describes a future where, interestingly, Papists and Protestants unite, Catholics and Protestants joining forces to push for Sunday enforcement, appealing to governments to make it law.
So different groups uniting for this common cause of Sunday observance using state power.
That's the picture painted. It even mentions warnings of fines, imprisonment, maybe even rewards offered to people if they give up their faith regarding the Sabbath.
But there's resistance described too, right? People holding firm.
Absolutely. The text portrays those loyal to God's law as steadfastly demanding scriptural proof for why they should change their practice. They won't just bow to authority.
And these confrontations, these trials, they actually spread the message.
Paradoxically, yes. The idea is that persecution forces the issues out into the open, bringing the truth as they see it before thousands who might never have heard it otherwise.
Interesting. Then there's this concept of the latter rain. What's that about?
It's described as a special, powerful outpouring of the Holy Spirit happening towards the very end of the gospel age. Sort of like the former rain at Pentecost, but maybe even more powerful.
And what does this latter rain accomplish?
It's seen as empowering believers for a final massive proclamation of this warning message across the globe. Thousands of voices spreading the message, accompanied by miracles, healings, signs, and wonders.
A global event.
Yes, but the text also warns that Satan will counterfeit this, working his own lying wonders to deceive people. So discernment will be crucial.
And the impact of this true message, empowered by the Spirit.
It's described as carrying deep conviction. It leads many honest people to make difficult choices, separating from family, churches, long-held traditions, because truth becomes more precious than anything else.
So a great sorting. almost.
You could say that.
Yeah.
A large number taking their stand for what they believe is God's side, even with all the opposition.
Okay, so let's try to pull this together. We started with the enthusiasm for an American Pope, then the theory from Advent Messenger about a strategic Vatican-U.S. alignment.
Right, contrasted with those historic Protestant concerns about church-state power.
Then we dove into the prophetic interpretation linking this to Revelation 13, the two beasts, the U.S. exercising papal power.
Leading into the final warning framework from the Great Controversy, centering on the Sabbath versus Sunday, the mark of the beast, the seal of God.
The predicted church-state union for enforcement, the resistance, the latter rain, and this final separation based on conviction.
It's quite a narrative. And it's crucial, as we've said, to remember this is a specific theological lens from these particular sources, interpreting current events through prophecy. They focus on potential long-term implications for religious freedom and global power.
Absolutely. It's one interpretation laid out quite clearly in the sources we looked at. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Reflecting on these perspectives, the mix of politics, religion, national identity, and these specific prophetic interpretations, what parts of this analysis resonate most, or perhaps raise the most questions for you? What further research might you do to build your own understanding of these complex dynamics?
Food for thought, definitely.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.